There are microplastics in all of us. There are microplastics in human testicles, in human brains. There is no such thing as wild Atlantic salmon. It would be white if you didn't feed it more coloring. Tony Robbins is a good example of this. I always get a little sad when I see people feeding their dogs kibble. Humans are the only species that's kind of forgotten this. We don't know what we're supposed to eat. I'm not saying that we shouldn't eat chicken and pork. I'm just making a case for...
A lot of talk about hormones in the meats and all this kind of stuff. I mean, how poisoned is the beef, poultry, pork section, fish section? You know, you can't even find wild caught salmon. You have to order it online.
Right. Yeah. So every one of those is a little bit. I'll talk about each of them individually. Let's start with fish. So you point this out correctly. When you go, and I've done a lot of videos on this, when you go to Costco or wherever you buy fish, there is no such thing as wild Atlantic salmon. All Atlantic salmon is farm raised. And they'll say Atlantic salmon, and then it'll say small letters farm raised. And most of us have heard that farm raised fish is much worse than wild caught fish because it has PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls. And they're feeding these fish food. They're feeding them basically the equivalent of a Big Mac is what they're feeding the fish in the tank that are farm raised, right? And there are parallels across all the species. I have a dog, and I feed my dog raw meat, raw organs, and bone. I always get a little sad when I see people feeding their dogs kibble. And again, this is no judgment if people feed their dogs kibble. I understand that there are financial limitations, and not everyone is going to feed their dog just raw animal foods. But there are better and worse types of kibbles. The majority of kibble for dogs is full of seed oils and really badly processed grains full of pesticides. Well, essentially what they're feeding, the lowest quality kibble that you're feeding to a dog is what they're feeding to fish, give or take. So you're feeding your fish kibble in a farm-raised salmon operation, and the fish are just less healthy. They accumulate pesticides, pharmaceuticals, contaminants, microplastics, and PCBs. And so farm-raised fish is not something that humans should be eating. Most people don't know this, but every time I talk about it, it gets a lot of engagement. Farm-raised salmon has coloring added, and sometimes they use beta-carotene, which is a natural coloring, but those farm-raised salmon are not getting the nutrients necessary to make things like astaxanthin, which gives fish its normal pink color in the wild because they're not eating algae. They have to give the fish extra color. So farm-raised salmon would be the color of tilapia or sea bass. It would be white.
Holy shit.
If you didn't feed it more coloring. And so don't eat farm-raised fish, but even when it comes to wild fish, you have to realize that large wild fish, shark, some of the big tunas, swordfish are very highly contaminated with heavy metals, such that in medicine, if a woman is pregnant, we say, don't eat that in your pregnancy. Yeah. It has a lot of mercury.
What are those fish again? Swordfish?
The biggest ones, swordfish, shark, and some of the big tunas. Even mahi, pretty high. The bigger the fish, the higher it is up the food chain, and the more it accumulates heavy metals. The smaller fish have less heavy metals, but they still have significant amounts. There are documented cases of mercury poisoning from eating sushi. And, sushi could be a mix of salmon plus tuna. But if you ate tuna every day, you would unequivocally see the levels of heavy metals, mostly mercury, but also cadmium, arsenic, and lead in your body go up just geometrically. So this is the problem. And some tuna is better than other tunas, but tuna is such a big fish that it just has a lot of heavy metals. And this probably wasn't an issue for fish 200 to 300 years ago. We have this industrial cycle where we put these pollutants into the air and then they go into the ocean and they bioaccumulate in the food chain. And we've done this to the ocean. We've created this problem of pollution in the ocean with fish. Even wild-caught fish has a significant amount of microplastics. Microplastics are things, there's little tiny, tiny fragments of plastic that hold on to, because they're plastic, they kind of magnetize, quote unquote. They get stuck to other chemicals, whether it's organic chemicals, other pesticides. So microplastics themselves are these microscopic or nano type size plastics. And we think about this in terms of like plastic water bottles, but plastic cutting boards. Our biggest exposures are probably those, but fish is quite high in microplastics. And they've done studies now showing that there are microplastics in all of us. There are microplastics in human testicles, in human brains. There is an appreciable amount of microplastic in all of our brains. In terms of it's not even micrograms, it's I think the actual number is milligram. There's like, I'd have to look at the number. It might be 0.5 milligram of microplastic in all of our brains. And this is just from things that we're eating in our bodies, bringing into our bodies. So fish have microplastics, even wild caught. They have heavy metals. They have forever chemicals, which are called PFAs. We've been hearing a lot about these. And so I would not recommend that people make the majority of their protein from fish. We'll get to it in this interview because we'll talk about why red meat has become so vilified. I think that well-raised red meat is my preference for protein source for humans, but that's the one that gets the most hate, right? Because it has more saturated fat, and we'll talk about why that is. But a lot of people trying to be healthy don't eat red meat and they eat fish, thinking that fish is healthier, but you are accumulating heavy metals, microplastics, forever chemicals, et cetera, when you are eating fish every day. So you must check that. And there are many of high-profile cases of people getting heavy metal toxicity from pescatarian diets. Tony Robbins is a good example of this. So that's the sort of dismal outlook on fish. Pork and chicken are grouped together. These are monogastric animals. So in contrast to ruminant animals, so elk, bison, deer, antelope, cows, those are ruminants. Pigs and chicken are monogastric animals. Humans are also monogastric, and that will be relevant later when we talk about seed oils. But monogastric animals are problematic because they accumulate polyunsaturated fats. And a pig or a chicken is not meant to eat a lot of corn and soy, but that's most of what they're fed today. So most of the big operations around chicken, even eggs for chickens and pork, pigs, are feeding them grains, which are corn and soy. And so you can see historically, and there's actual research done about this, that the fatty acid composition of these animals changes based on what they eat. It does the same for humans. We can see derivatives of seed oils accumulating in human fat over the last 80 years because we're eating more of these seed oils, which come from corn and soy. And so the fat of a chicken doesn't look like the fat of an ancestral wild chicken. The amount of linoleic acid, which is an 18 carbon polyunsaturated fat, is much higher in a chicken fed corn and soy than it would be in a chicken eating what a chicken is supposed to eat, which is bugs and worms and maybe a mouse every once in a while in the field. Chickens are pretty omnivorous, and pigs are the same way. Pigs root. They're supposed to eat, they will eat small animals too. And they're supposed to eat, tubers and things. But when you feed a pig corn and soy, the fat of the pig changes composition. And these grains that most chickens and pigs are fed are not organic, and so you're getting bioaccumulation of pesticides. So you're getting glyphosate. I'm not saying that we shouldn't eat chicken and pork. I'm just making a case for maybe a hierarchy of quality. Yeah. If you're going to eat chicken and pork, look for something that's pastured from a farmer that you know. I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good for anyone, but there are considerations for each of these meats as we go along the food chain. So I personally don't eat a lot of chicken and pork because it's hard to find people that are letting their chickens really range and actually eat what they're supposed to eat. The same with pigs. And when we talk about seed oils, we'll talk about why I think excess linoleic acid is a problem for humans. It's a little technical, so I'll save it for this moment, but we'll get to it. But if you're going to eat pork, which is delicious and does have nutrients that are good for humans, and many cultures do eat pigs, or chicken, try and get something that's organic. So that means the grains they're feeding the animals are organic, so you're not getting as much pesticide contamination. Even better, get it from a farmer at a farmer's market that is letting their animals kind of go more pastured in the settings. And then you have beef, bison, elk, let's call it red meat, lamb. So what's interesting about these animals is there is a growing sector of the farming market, the agriculture market, where you can buy a grass-fed cow, grass-fed, grass-finished. Ruminant animals are supposed to eat grass their whole life. That's what they do. In fact, I think there were surveys done in the 1800s that looked at the United States, and there were something like over 50 million ruminants in the United States. So elk, antelope, pronghorn, bison, that's what made sort of the American West and why that land was so fertile. We've monocropped it and decreased the quality of the soil. But the reason the American West of, Louisiana and the Mississippi was so fertile was because these animals were eating grass and pooping and peeing on the land and then stomping and putting all these nutrients from their poop into the land, which makes a healthy soil. and that makes a healthy grass, and it just is part of this grassland ecosystem. So
Mhm.
these animals are meant to eat grass, and cows are kind of a cousin of bison. And when a cow eats grass, you can see the difference in the steaks. I've done this in my content. You can see the color of the fat and the color of the meat is different. The fat of an animal that eats grass its whole life is much more orange because of the beta carotene and other carotenoids in the grass that it's eating. A grain fed cow has very white fat. And to be fair, a lot of grain fed cattle are actually grain finished. Most of their life, they're eating grass, but the last 15%, they're taken to a feedlot where they're given lower quality grains and it makes them fat. And then the farmers can get more money for them because they're a bigger animal and they sell them by the pound.
Okay.
So ideally, and again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, any red meat is healthy for humans and provides benefits for us and is full of nutrients. But ideally, if you can source or find or afford a grass-fed, grass-finished meat, like a grass-fed hamburger or steak, it's going to be more full of nutrients and less full of problematic things that come with the grains. Again, you're having pesticide accumulation in the meat, microplastics, PFAs, all that kind of stuff comes when they're fed grains at the end of their life. It's not the end of the world. And I've eaten grain-fed, grain-finished meat, and some people prefer it because of the taste. But I do think there's a pretty solid case that a grass-fed, grass-finished cow is the closest thing that most people will get to eating a wild animal. Wild game is probably one of the healthiest things we can eat, depending where it's ranging, right? An animal that's eating what it's supposed to eat, and this applies to humans also, is going to be a healthier animal. And all of us are different species, but there is, I think, in all of us, a genetic programming in terms of what we are meant to eat. Humans are the only species that's kind of forgotten this because we've become so separated from the actual gathering and hunting of our food. So we don't know what we're supposed to eat.
So when we go to the store and it says grass-fed beef, can we trust that? Or does that mean, hey, this was fed grass the first 6 months of its life and then grain?
The way the labeling is now, if it says grass-fed, it really should be fed grass its whole life. There's an asterisk there because some farmers can get away with this by feeding hay, which is not fresh grass on a field, or even grass pellets. So there was a picture or a video that went around the internet recently of cows indoors getting fed grass, and that is grass-fed. It's not ideal, but it's better than a grain-fed cow on a clustered or concentrated feeding animal operation, so a CAFO or a factory farm. So grass feeding is better. And again, and it's unfortunate that it's become so arduous for humans to have to really understand the quality of their meat. But if you see the cows that you're eating and you're talking to a farmer, that's the best thing. I know it's not possible for everyone listening to the podcast, but if you can understand the quality of your meat and where it's coming from and how it's raised, that's better. So grass feeding and grass finishing ideally should be cows on pasture outdoors, pooping and peeing in the land, because that's also better for the land. That's the way it should be. If it says grass-fed in the store, it really is meant, unless the farmer is being totally duplicitous, it should be fed grass its whole life. There's an interesting little sidebar here, and I will call Whole Foods out for this, and I've done content on this. There is meat at Whole Foods that says grass-fed or grass-finished, and there's meat at Whole Foods that says pasture-raised. And so that pasture-raised designation does not mean the cow is eating grass its whole life.
Okay.
And you can ask the butchers at Whole Foods, and they will be forthcoming with you and say it was on pasture and then it was fed grains at the end of its life. So that's where it gets confusing for consumers, because pasture-raised sounds pretty good to me, but that's not a grass-finished cow. And do I think that eating grain-fed meat is bad for humans? No. I think that eating grass-fed, grass-finished meat is better for humans and better for the ecosystem in which the cow is raised.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.